Welcome to Clandestine Radio Podcast, Season 4.
I don't know, I guess I just had the ambition to talk to people this year, bring back the interview format. I also still try to do several deep dives and cover some topics that I've really been wanting to get to and never had a chance to. And I guess just hope that everybody's willing to come along for the ride. Good evening, curious minds out there across the world. And welcome, Clandestine Radio Podcast. As always, I'm your host, DJ Jazwa, and this is the BTR episode for File002, Epstein, The Reckoning. I feel like it's been a while since I just kind of got on here and talked to you guys. How are you doing? I hope everybody's doing very well out there. I know these are crazy times. Hang in there as best you can. So I want to get into a couple of things in this BTR. It's not going to be really like the standard BTR, because there's several elements that I didn't get into throughout the course of those episodes. Believe it or not, there's way more content to it. But I also just kind of want to go over some things that I see going on and give you my thoughts on it. I'd love to get your thoughts as well, and we'll discuss how to do that here in just a bit. I just want to say, this series, man, it definitely took a lot out of me. There was a massive amount of time that was put into just the research and the investigation phase. It was definitely the hardest to try to synthesize down to, at least into something that would hit on the most important parts of the story without dragging on, hopefully, too much. And I just want to say again that I really appreciate all of you for listening to it. And for those who have reached out and kind of just let me know that they were enjoying it and give me some thoughts on it. And with the full series out there now, I really hope that you feel that it was worth listening to at least. And hopefully you came away from it with a better understanding of what all took place and what certainly still is taking place. Because operations like that don't just stop existing when the main facilitator goes down. This was all taking place long before Epstein, or Franklin, or Mark Dutroux for that matter, or I guess any of the ones that we've accidentally got to look at over the years. There are stories like this that run all throughout history of the world. For now though, let's just focus back in on this one, and I'll share some of my personal thoughts for anyone that might be curious. So we started off with his background and how he rose to where he was. I personally don't feel that his progression of jobs was anything close to being organic or just being built by him alone, off of his merit, which he didn't even have starting off. In those sort of elite spaces, it isn't what you do or even really what you know, it's who you know and how they can make connections. That being said, finding someone with no moral compass willing to grease the wheels and be as unscrupulous as they need to be, particularly in a way that helps the wealthy make more money or conceal their money in ways that they otherwise couldn't, that has its own kind of sort of value. Epstein was never afraid to do the illegal thing that needed doing. That's for sure. And the fact that he was able to do so for so long and at such a high level of success at it strongly leads me to believe that he was definitely, well, we know he was working for the FBI, and a very strong indication that he's working for intel agencies very early on. His clean escape from the Towers Financial Ponzi scheme deal, that wasn't dumb luck, at least not in my opinion. Nor was the fact that the FBI was made aware of his sex crimes as early as '86, and yet they refused to do anything or act on it. To me, it screams that he was already being protected, even from the very start. Aside from what I presented in the series, I found traces of investigations that were kind of supposedly started, but never ultimately moved forward, and that happened all throughout his life. It's as if he had a little guardian angel, or agency, that was watching over him. And as compelling as Donald Barr's intel connections are, I feel that he may have only been when he hit their radar. If I were forced to say what his first work in intelligence was, I would say it was at Bear Stearns, where he was clearing the BCCI transactions. And like I said in the episode, to be clear, I can't prove that, but that is what my gut says. And it would also explain how he was able to get in so easily with people like Douglas Lees and Adnan Khashoggi, which led to the whole Iran-Contra deals and the intro into meeting Stephen Hoffenberg and all of that. There just seems to be intel fingerprints all over his early years. Personal opinion again, I think he was likely introduced to Robert and Ghislaine Maxwell and that kind of marked the start of him being co-opted by the Mossad at least. But I also know there's an absurd amount of documents that are missing, and I'm sure that they would help to kind of clarify that story significantly. I know there's likely more missing from the story than what we actually know. And ever since his first arrest in 2008, there has been a concerted effort to suppress the story and to obscure as many of the details as possible from the public. If not for the EFTA, we still wouldn't know even a fraction of what we do now. Agencies basically circled the wagons, if you will, and they did their very best to kind of keep as many details as possible out of the light, out of public accountability, and definitely off the news. And even the survivors who pushed hard for his first arrest were the sole reason that it even ever happened. They were kept in the dark about the details of the plea deal. Not only at that time, but it took over a year of them demanding answers and working the judicial system for the Florida Circuit Court judge, I believe, to finally ever order that the plea deal be unsealed. That was 2 months after he was released from jail, though. And it really wouldn't be for another 8 years before many of those details would actually finally come out. And that was just largely due to the diligent reporting that was done by Julie K. Brown. And much respect to her. From the Miami Herald. She did some really good journalistic work and definitely was a major catalyst for him going back to jail. At every turn in this story, you'll find unprecedented attempts to enable and protect Epstein. And the more that you look into this case, the clearer it starts to become that very powerful people and entities were actively working to ensure that his operation was able to continue and continue unimpeded. They needed the services that he provided, and not just the trafficking. He was extremely skillful at hiding money from the IRS and apparently great at reducing tax burdens for powerful people. Few have ever worked the shell game quite as deftly as he was able to. That was the main reason that trying to work out everything that he actually owned was so difficult. And virtually everything that he had was running through this complex web of shell companies and LLCs and revocable trusts and offshore banking and tax havens and proxies and nominees, and it goes on and on and on. Everything is just kind of put layers of obfuscation and show that someone or something else was the actual owner instead of him. And he excelled at routing funds through charities and foundations as well. Regardless of what anyone says about how intelligent he was or he wasn't, there's really no denying that he firmly understood complex financial networks and instruments. Better than most people, it seems, ever have, or maybe ever will. And it's really just that he had so much going on, and there's so much smoke and mirrors involved that it all starts to kind of read as just being bullshit. There was so much that I wasn't even able to fit into the series, even as long and admittedly extensive as it was. And one example was the depth of his relationship with Peter Thiel. I added an extra, I think it's just a scan image of an email, and it's included in the document folder, so you can check that out for yourself. It was recently added to it. And it's a conversation between Epstein and a redacted party where Epstein says, quote, "Peter Thiel loved the secret society idea. He has done a lot of work on the concept, all failed so far." And given what we recently learned about Thiel's little secret dialogue group that was involving, 100, 200, whatever so-called elite people, it seems to possibly support the assumption that I've had that they did form some manner of a secret society together, with Epstein being a driving force behind it. His full involvement is really hard to pin down based on the limited information that we do have, but there's other evidence possibly tying the group to Epstein in some capacity. In 2012, Harvard physicist Lisa Randall forwarded Dialogue's 2014 retreat invitation to Epstein to ask if she should attend, which Epstein would tell her to go. And that invitation was signed by Thiel and co-founder Orrin Hoffman, and it described the group as gathering, quote, 150 people to change the world. Internal emails from the following year in September shows biotech executive and close Bill Gates advisor buddy, Peter Nikolic, forwarding Epstein contents from a dialogue breakout session. And given the group's founding, it clearly predates the February 6, 2016 email about Thiel loving the secret society idea, so it's safe to assume that whatever group may have been spawned between them was not actually Dialogue. Those timelines just don't add up. But despite only recently being uncovered at any kind of depth, at least, It did have a website and some degree of public-facing presence. And while it's still a very private club, a secret society, it would need at least a few more layers of obfuscation than his name directly being associated with its founding and having it plastered on unsecure emails that are floating around. I would think, anyways. It's not very secret of a society otherwise. The redacted party from Epstein's secret society email would respond back later that same day with a smiley face and 3 words: "Let's do it." And just know I wanted to put the first 3 notes of "let's get it on" right here, but I didn't want them to come for me. With enough digging, I was finally able to figure out that the redacted party was actually Joi Ito, who's a Japanese tech entrepreneur. He was pressured to resign from his position at MIT, as well as several corporate and philanthropic boards that he was on. And basically his career just got imploded because of revelations that he solicited and concealed millions of dollars in donations from Epstein. And yeah, that was well after he was convicted as a sex offender. Joi Ito was also directly linked to the formation of the Dialogue Group. So there's just a ton of overlap there. And it's really hard to suss out if it was 2 groups, if it was 1 group in 2 different phases, or what exactly was going on. But its member list runs virtually parallel to that of the Epstein network. And it's unclear whether their email exchange was related to collaborative work, trying to expand Dialogue's scope, to integrate new elite networks into it, or, like I said, to form a totally separate secret society. I could go on and on about Dialogue, though, which actually existed a good 20 years before being exposed recently. But this BTR isn't really about that, and Epstein's involvement remains a little too elusive to fully pin down as far as Dialogue goes. But getting back to the episode, another point that I wanted to address, but forgot to circle back to in the episodes, it involves his supposed death. Now, when I first dug into his death years ago, the fact that he had a new will drawn up and that he had signed it 2 days, literally 2 days before his supposed death, that at the time seemed to me to kind of further indicate that he did plan on dying, or that he at least feared for his life. It really wasn't until I got into digging into his seeming escape plans and all that part of it, and the events surrounding that 4chan post, the one about, him being transferred out and all that, the guard was shaking, blah, blah, blah. That's when it really kind of dawned on me that it might be helpful to look at what was actually changed in that second will. And there's an important distinction that I have to make up front here. This is purely a working theory, and I'm not claiming this to be a fact, nor am I saying that the documents and anomalous circumstances prove anything definitively, at least not on their own. What I am saying is that taken together, they make a certain possibility a lot easier to imagine. And these BTR episodes are intended to be the vehicle that I use to share my personal thoughts and theories about the subject from the main episode. So I try to keep the main episodes rooted in provable facts, and then here I give you my take on stuff. If you've listened to the podcast for any real amount of time, then I'm sure that you know this already, but we do have a lot of new listeners, so I just wanted to try and make that distinction clear up front. With that being said, here's what I noticed. The first major deviation from his previous will is the statement under Article 2 on the first page. And yes, I've included a copy of his will, which I've also added to the folder. It's titled Addendum Documents for BTR, so you can find it a little easier. Which states, quote, "I give all of my property, real and personal, wherever situated, after the payments and distributions provided in Article 1st, to the then acting trustees of the 1953 Trust, created under that certain trust agreement of the 1953 Trust, dated August 8th, 2019, as the same may be amended from time to time to be held in accordance with the provisions comprising the trust agreement at the time of my death," end quote. And we'll dig into what that really means in a second, but what makes Epstein's new will and this 1953 trust stand out, it isn't that it proves a hidden escape plan on its own, but that it fits nicely inside the possibility. Those amendments, if you will, are especially interesting because they show a level of financial control and opacity that, at bare minimum, raises some very compelling questions. And it's compelling, given all of the other things that also hint at the escape plan and all of the other extremely anomalous and convenient elements that seem to point towards that conclusion. By creating this trust, and never mind how ridiculously prescient it was for him to do so just 2 days before he supposedly up and died, he creates the perfect mechanism to conceal who is accessing his wealth and how. It adds layers of obfuscation that otherwise wouldn't really be justified under normal circumstances. But if someone was planning to fake their death, it would be precisely what someone would do in order to ensure that they could still have control over and access to their money without ever having to expose that it was actually them doing it. It conceals control, beneficiary access, and movement of assets, such as what took place roughly 4 months after his supposed death, which is when his estate transferred $15.5 million to Southern Country International, which wasn't a mainstream retail bank, not by a long shot. It's a specialized offshore banking entity that Epstein had set up in the Virgin Islands, with him being the only person that was using it. It had a banking license, and it was designed to strictly serve offshore clients, but Epstein was its only customer, and it functioned like a private financial vehicle that Epstein solely controlled more than anything else. The New York Times would describe it as a quote-unquote mystery bank, and it's also important to note that it only became active after Epstein's death, and his lawyers offered no clear explanation for why those transfers happened. All we know for sure is that the $15.5 million was transferred to SCI in the form of 2 checks from his estate. For some unknown reason, $2.6 million would then be returned from SCI and back into his estate a few days later. Most compelling is that there's no record of anyone aside from Epstein having account access with that SCI account. And there's no language in his will that would have added anyone else or given control over explicitly to the estate or the trust. Only what remained from his estate would be given to the trust. While even this, as suspicious as it is, doesn't prove that he was alive and directing the funds, necessarily. It does, at very least, raise even more questions about estate handling and serves to add yet another layer of opacity to the already extremely opaque handling of his finances after his supposed death. While basic math shows that at least $12.9 million would have remained in his Southern Country account, the year-end asset value of SCI was reported as being just $499,759, which is a pretty big discrepancy that's not easily reconciled. It could be read as SCI served as a temporary transfer point, just another opaque layer used to disguise where exactly that money was going and who exactly was accessing it. And since SCI wasn't a public bank in any traditional sense, and like I said, it functioned as more of a private offshore financial vehicle, the oversight and regulation would have been virtually non-existent. And its transactional ledger would have been, able to be kept largely private, potentially completely off the record altogether. And again, to be clear, none of this on its own proves that he faked his death. But if someone was gonna do it, he did it exactly how they would have done it. It's really the only way that he could have faked his death and still be able to retain possession and access to that money without raising any red flags or be having to tell anybody that it was him accessing it. So that's just kind of a little bit of information that I left out of the episode. And obviously there's way more than that. I just never could really get into. It would take seasons of doing it. And I've got a little bit of news that I want to get into here in just a minute. But before we do that, I want to just kind of very quickly give you my honest thoughts on the Epstein story. Not all of it, obviously. We would be here all week. But I want to at least hit on some of the more interesting and lingering questions from it. And if you want my thoughts on any of the rest of it, reach out. I always respond. Ask anyone who's ever tried. I respond to any kind of comments, emails, whatever, messages in the Discord or the other chat. And I always like hearing from you guys. I also just want to go ahead and say that I do my very best, again, to keep my opinions out of these sort of series and to try to stick mostly to just presenting the provable facts or, the strong possibilities. But I always try to clearly distinguish which is which throughout the episode. I'm not always successful, but I do try. And this story, I'd be lying if I said that it didn't affect me, as I'm sure a lot of you could probably tell, at least at parts of it. I was fighting back a lot of emotion during reading, especially that diary part, for example, was very tough. At the end of the last episode, I always do my best to try and be professional, I guess for what that's worth, but I am a human. Spoiler alert. I know, may have been up in the air, but I am. Try as I may to just convey the info without bias, sometimes I can't. I mean, I just can't. The whole reason that I cover these kind of stories like Epstein, Franklin, or the Mark Dutroux scandal is because most other media out there is bought and paid for. Even many content creators and supposed independent journalists are beholden to sponsors at least, are part of larger networks, and all those people in the legacy media are more than happy to just move on or bury these kind of stories. And you'll see that happen over and over with them, especially in those stories that are remotely inconvenient for the government or the so-called elite, or really those with any sort of real power. And sadly, 9 out of 10 times, they are successful in suppressing these stories. And for every story like this that does get revealed, there are thousands more that get kept out of the public spotlight and off the news. And cases that are just dropped due to corruption, and stories that just get buried from it all. And there are even more where the people being abused are just murdered, or they feel too threatened of what happened to say anything about it and feel safe. And their voices are stolen from them. So I take it very seriously to try and give as much of a voice to these as I can with what limited reach I have. I've seen a lot of horrible shit covering these sort of cases, even long before this podcast, as well as close up and in talking to survivors. And there are many that I've known over the years, up close, spoken to, but I guess I'm just trying to say forgive me if I go on tangents, or I can't hide my hurt or my anger, or I go overboard in any way to get these stories out as best I know how. And thanks for putting up with me, I guess. So back to Epstein, real quick. From everything that I've seen, and there is way more that I didn't cover, like I said, mostly that is just because I didn't feel like I had enough provable evidence to present those elements responsibly. But I think that it was crystal clear that he was working on behalf of, at very least, Israeli intelligence. And I believe others, likely our CIA for one example. We know that he was a CHS for the FBI. We don't know when that relationship first began, or when/if it ever ended. We can just say that it's a very high degree of certainty that he did, and it clearly played a major role in securing his 2008 non-prosecution agreement. Why his co-conspirators and known and unknown people were spared is a little less clear, but my guess would be that they were also privy to his connections and knew where the proverbial bodies, and possibly literally, were buried, and that deal helped ensure their silence, just to put it plainly. Because if they got pinched and then they decided to speak about what they knew, it would implicate many very powerful people and agencies, and also expose the size, depth, and scale of the operation, which would definitely make it impossible to continue using Epstein, at least, who was a high-value component thanks to his giant network and ability to, I guess, ingratiate himself and quickly gain access to a wide array of people. He was nothing if not a master manipulator. You can get a fairly good close-up example of that in his interview with Steve Bannon. He was intelligent in the most insidious ways possible. He was able to quickly figure out ways to exploit systems, be that financial, intellectual, or social. And when you add in Ghislaine Maxwell by his side, she provided a whole other level of social access and fluidity of connections. Given her father's giant network and her life spent as a well-off socialite growing in those elite spaces, she brought in a lot of connections like that Epstein would have struggled to ever penetrate on his own. He grew up fairly well off, but not to the level of old money wealth that Ghislaine had. One of the many connections that I believe she provided that would have otherwise been at least very difficult, if not impossible, was to the Rothschild family, through the introduction that she provided to Ariane de Rothschild, which I realized in hindsight I was mispronouncing at least half of the time. Sorry, French is kind of a weak spot for me in general. And honestly, I don't care for that family enough to worry about saying their names right most of the time. So, and I also vacillated at times in my pronunciation of Rothschild, and typically settled in between the widely accepted English version, or pronunciation of Rothschild, rather than the actual correct way, which is closer to Rothschild, which, as I covered back in the Real Illuminati series, means red shield, like literally translated, and that's reflected in their family crest and all that. As far as I can track down, it was most likely Ghislaine who would have made that connection, but I can't prove it. Only their father knew and had dealings with the Rothschilds, and like many of Robert's connections, Ghislaine inherited it from him. Like most of Epstein's connections, though, especially in his early years, exactly how he was able to form those to start with is very hard to pinpoint. Now, I think I owe it to you to get into this for a little bit. regarding his darker and more satanic, for lack of a better word, activities and interests, I know for good reason discussion of those elements seem to be a bridge too far for some people, which I do get. I totally get that. From the so-called satanic panic of the 80s and the subsequent trivializing of the topic in general, I know it kind of sounds absurd, I guess, to believe, at least for intelligent and seemingly non-religious or even outwardly atheistic people, that they would believe in it or use things like rituals or sex magic, especially with how much that gets brushed aside and basically made fun of in the media these days. And if it's something that you feel that you're too smart to buy into, then generally you can't foresee people that are successful believing in it either. It seems like antiquated ideas, and that's totally understandable. I've been the same way for most of my adult life. However, people have historically, and even in modern times, very much believed in it and practiced it to various degrees and forms. And just to be clear, I'm not just talking about the Anton LaVey cartoonish Church of Satan types. I'm talking about Kabbalah and Crowley's, Thelema, and sex magic type beliefs, along with even darker things like satanic ritual abuse of children, which does take place. Things that pop up over and over again, not just with the dregs of society and trafficking circles, but in elite spaces as well, like the Sisters of Darkness, for example, which we discussed in the Real Illuminati series as well, and many other very dark accusations of cannibalism and yes, even adrenochrome harvesting. Things that there are a lot of real evidence for, but you're supposed to think that it's ridiculous, that it's because that's been programmed into your mind for most of your life at this point, which is precisely why whenever evidence for it pops up, it just gets ridiculed, laughed off, and painted as being nothing more than crazy talk. And to be fair, in many cases it probably is. But how many of those cases were deliberately set up for that very purpose as disinformation? And I want to dig into that just a little bit. I think it makes the whole story seem a little more feasible. When the government wanted people to stop questioning the Kennedy assassination, remember, the CIA coined the term conspiracy theorist. And they did all that they could to paint anyone asking very valid questions at the time regarding the official narrative as just being crazy conspiracy theorists. And it was done in hopes of them being maligned and made to feel like fringe social outcasts, because it helps to shut down their valid questions, and it discouraged, above all, other people from even asking them or wanting to be associated with them. And it worked. It worked so well, in fact, that to this day, they've influenced that perception. The perception that quote-unquote normal intellectual people don't believe in any crazy conspiracy theories, which has come to mean anything that goes against the official narrative. Just a few years ago, when people like myself and so many others were doing legitimate research, using peer-reviewed studies and literature to point out the lies, hypocrisy, blatant insanity that was all surrounding the virus, the absurd protocols put in place, and the experimental gene therapy that they pushed on all of us with all of their might, very much illegally, might I add, we were once again all painted as tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy nuts, and worse yet, spreading quote-unquote dangerous misinformation. Then, lo and behold, more and more of what we were saying began being proven and admitted to, and even more is being proven every single year, it seems like. But this sort of gaslighting and narrative control, it's nothing new. It's been going on since at least the 60s, I believe way before that. But that's when you first started seeing stuff about Operation Mockingbird, which is not a conspiracy theory. The CIA had agents installed in and bought many others that were in newsrooms across the country. And while using propaganda against the U.S. population was supposed to technically be illegal, or at least it was until Obama repealed the, Smith-Mundt Act, I believe, through the modernization of the Smith-Mundt Act, which was in 2013, I think. The CIA, which operates and always has, largely outside of congressional and even presidential oversight, they were still doing it. When William Colby, who was the CIA director at the time, when he got dragged in front of the Church Committee, which in the mid-70s, straight on 1975, I'm pretty sure. He was asked about it directly, and despite answering all sorts of other questions about illegal and controversial operations, coups, assassinations, etc., way more than the rest of the intelligence apparatus wanted him to, for the record, he straight up refused to answer that one question. I'm pretty sure that his answer, which he sort of gave an answer, but that is the sort of thing that's best discussed in a closed-door session. And that was one of the things that they knew that they could not allow to be exposed. It was just too important. because it gave them sway over not just every narrative, but over the conversation in the public sphere, and greatly influenced people's perception of the news or whatever the story was. So if you think that for 1 second they would just give up that ability, you'd be dead wrong. One last thing that I'll say about Epstein, probably the biggest takeaway that I came to understand, and that you hopefully come away from that series knowing, is that Epstein was only one element in a much larger and far older system. And that system didn't just go away once he was exposed. It's still going on right now, and many of those involved not only avoided any meaningful fallout, but they are working hard, both publicly and behind the scenes right now, to ensure that there is no further accountability, and that the people who benefited from what Epstein provided are still able to go on doing so. I really wish that I could have ended the series on a positive note, that I could have told you, justice was served or our justice system works, but I'd be lying. In fact, I feel like it has never been more obvious than right now that we do have a two-tiered justice system, and it has a bad habit of failing anytime a bigger abuse network is at risk of being exposed. It just does, and it's happened countless times now. So while the government, particularly right here in the U.S., would love nothing more than for us to all just accept the Fed slop and move on to the next distraction, that cannot happen. While cover-up artists like Todd Blanche make it clear that they feel their job is over, I feel our job is far from complete. And it's really on us to keep asking questions and demanding answers, demanding justice for all involved. And not only that, but to never forget what the signs of this type of network and abuse look like. To learn to recognize them and spot them and call it out and shut it down before the next Epstein, who is already out there, I guarantee it, can leave a trail of shattered lives and survivors behind them as extensive as Epstein was. To at very least, we need to be vigilant enough to ensure that this doesn't happen to our children or those that we know and love. I know I've turned one last point into a full-on rant at this point, but the case mattered. It still matters, and it always will matter. And it very much feels like accountability is left up to us. Now, let's get into a little bit of news real quick before we get out of here. Now, as I mentioned up front, this isn't going to be the standard several stories, kind of giving you the news portion that I usually do. And if you actually follow my personal Facebook page, as I know a few of you actually do, thank you for that, by the way, then most of what I'm probably about to talk about, it really won't be new information to you. I'm currently working on adding the articles that I've written over there and putting them on the Patreon for free, and in the newsletter, which I know I've been slacking on lately, and I'm sorry about that. It's just between the series and my business for the last 2 months, it has been impossible to keep up with everything. But I've got a little bit of a lull here through the hottest parts of the summer, thank God. And so I plan on trying to get ahead on some stuff as far as working on stories, researching things, working more on the Patreon side, on the newsletter and all that stuff. So you'll hear from me, not so many episodes in the next little bit, but there will be some interview episodes coming out. Content will be coming out, but just not the bigger episodes. A lot of that's going to come mid to end season. So back to my quasi-news thing. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a heads up. I'm just going to basically shoot from the hip about some of these things that are the most important to me at the moment, I guess, so just bear with me. And I'll double fact check all of this while I'm editing it like I always do, so if it's in here, then I can back it up. And I've also listed some of the sources in the description for the episode. Please feel free to research all of this for yourself, by the way. I strongly encourage you to do so, which I encourage you to do that with any sort of news that you're getting. Trust no one, not even me, without at least looking it up and researching these kind of topics for yourself. There's honestly so much going on right now that it's hard to even say where the best place to start is. I guess we start when the Trump administration, this newest, shittiest one, first took office and began awarding contracts, because that's the most telling part of all of this. That our government is directly involved and pushing for all of the things that I'm about to talk about. Really, reporting really started to catch up and begin coming out around May or so of 2025, that Trump had ordered federal agencies to share data with Palantir, who had already received over $113 million for the record, million in federal taxpayer funding, just since Trump had gotten back into office like 5 months before that. It was also reported that Palantir's Foundry, which was already in use in, I think, at least 4 federal agencies, including U.S. Civil, Health, Homeland Security, and some others, and it's been at least at the HHS and the CDC. And that was since the scamdemic, to do everything from tracking the spread, to managing and mapping out the jab distribution and track compliance versus non-compliance and all those good insidious things they were doing. It's also in the IRS and many others. Really though, in the grand scheme of things, Foundry is their least insidious software, which should scare everyone, but it primarily combines like a wide array of data and workflows and mashes them into a single system so that it can analyze and manage things better. And while Foundry is basically like commercial software almost, it's at least like civil government platform that it uses. Gotham, which I can only imagine is named after that scene in The Dark Knight. You know what I'm talking about. I think it's like where Batman had that sonar, or that software that was running that turned everybody's cell phone in Gotham into like a microphone and sonar to get like real-time data so he could track down the Joker. Anyways, Gotham is the police and military software that combines all the data points, cameras, sensors, satellite, etc. into actionable intelligence, quote-unquote, to try and connect the dots and track targets using AI, including for unmanned vehicle platforms, which isn't terrifying at all. It's most notably been used by Israel against Palestine, and now Iran and Lebanon. All totaled, Palantir's been awarded billions by the U.S. government alone, including a single award for, look here, $1.3 billion by the DoD for use in Project Maven, which most people have never heard of, and they would prefer that it stays that way, so allow me to fuck that up for them. Project Maven was first launched back in 2017, and to overly simplify it massively, it's the Pentagon's AI program for analyzing huge volumes of data, like what is constantly being collected on us, and the reason for all these data centers, in case you're curious. It basically functions very similarly to Gotham by analyzing satellite and drone and other imagery, along with sensor data, and it's used to help identify targets and activity within footage, basically. It also, quote, supports targeting and operational decision-making. Maven falls under something called the Defense Department's Algorithmic Warfare Cross-Functional Team, which is a mouthful, to say it the least. While Antichrist-obsessed secret society starting tech bro Peter Thiel is a co-founder, the other main co-founder, who you may have seen with the crazy-ass hair, Alex Karp, is way more creepy even than he is. I really advise you just go look up some of the wild shit that guy said publicly. And I think you'll pretty quickly get the very distinct and indelible impression that he is a very, very evil person. Almost maybe even a shittier human being that is over the other horrifying AI tech company merging into the U.S. government, that being Larry Ellison, who founded Oracle. Oracle's core business, at least publicly I guess, is enterprise software and cloud infrastructure, which sounds pretty benign on the surface, but on the government side, they handle tons of data from billing and procurement, health records, HR duties, and also less mundane events and parts like internet, public safety, defense, and intelligence monitoring and cloud services for that. Once Oracle begins being integrated, this is one of the main points here, it becomes harder and harder to get out of bed with because it runs such a wide array of government systems. And Trump's been in that bed with them since his first term, by the way. See, a lot of the crazy shit that I'll be discussing here is actually rooted from seeds that were planted Trump's first term. But it was kept under wraps, I guess. And as dark as Palantir's Gotham is, Oracle is on track to be far worse. They're positioning themselves to be basically the back-end layer for government operations, for public safety and intelligence workflows, and their systems are specifically designed in order to ingest and utilize all camera feeds and surveillance data in a way that has potential to be even worse than Gotham could ever dream. But both systems are becoming bigger parts of this AI-powered surveillance state that we're watching right now forming around all of us. Oracle is building the infrastructure and an analytics layer, while Palantir is closer to the operational intelligence and the fusion layer. I guess is a decent way to put that. but both can sit inside a broader surveillance pipeline in order to absorb informational data from systems like our next big topic, flock cameras, making the vast amount of live and recorded data searchable and actionable. So for anyone unaware of the draconian eye in the sky that's been monitoring all of our movement since the early part of 2021 or so, let me introduce you to Flock, which is basically a mass movement surveillance network for people and for vehicles. One of the many privacy-violating abilities that they facilitate is letting anyone with access from police, federal agencies, and the like, to even just any outside actor, anyone with access or hackers. And they're able to quickly and easily build a profile on someone by reconstructing where someone goes, who they meet, and what are the typical routes that they take. And they can do all this without a warrant or even individual articulable suspicion, which should be like the base requirement for any sort of police interaction. And the worst part, there's no opt-out. This isn't a terms of service thing. If you drive past one of these, and there's estimated to be over 90,000, and they're across 49 states so far, then your plate, car details, and possibly your public records that are available or linked to them, it's all searchable. And this is a key component in any sort of a police state. Not just the cameras themselves, but the architecture. Widespread deployment, centralized searchability, interagency sharing, and weak to non-existent public visibility into who is actually searching for what and when and for what reason. And if anyone out there is still foolish, you won't be if you're listening to this show, but if anyone out there is still foolish and happens to hear this, enough to think that, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, you've got nothing to worry about. Systems like this render that moot, because there's such a high, especially right now, likelihood of false IDs, false positives, people being accused and not even really being able to fight it back because they're quote-unquote on camera, but the fidelity or the quality of what they actually have can be suspect. But as long as it's backed up by quote-unquote evidence from them, it's going to be very difficult to fight, and it's at least going to be very inconvenient, or it could lead to a lot of false imprisonments. You're not safe just because you're being a good little servant, okay? So go ahead and delete that thought. And there's been tons of abuse cases of people just stalking, like exes or somebody that they had a problem with. You're still open to having your life ruined, potentially, by these systems. And it becomes even worse, if you can imagine that, when it is combined with the latest nightmare that was cooked up by Leonardo called SignalTrace. Then, not only do you get the car info and the tag reader, you get an extra fun layer that grabs any digital signal inside of the car and is able to ID it to its user. And this includes your phone, your smartwatch, a fitness tracker, RFID tags, basically any electronic device. Not just the driver, but anyone in the vehicle. And it can provide a fully detailed tracking map of not just that car that you're in, but any person that's in range of it. And it extends as far as the camera can see at least, and potentially even further depending on the signal strength, which with 5G is quite a ways these days. Now that I've no doubt ruined your day, sorry about that, but you have all the building blocks in place, so let's bring it all home and see what's possible and what is actually being debated in government right now as we speak. First, I just want to paint a little picture here for you. I'm not saying that it's definitely going to happen, yada yada, but it's something to consider, and it's definitely been proposed, and we don't know the full intentions, but with everything else combined, it's very likely that it could happen, and it could be virtually impossible to resist, I'll put it that way. And that being these quote-unquote 15-minute cities. Yes, I know, that far-right conspiracy theory, as they would love for you to believe, and that they love painting virtually anything that they get caught doing as. And on the surface, it is a urban design concept. It was pioneered by a quote-unquote urbanist, whatever that means, named Carlos Marino. And he supposedly did it to reduce car usage and emissions while, quote, improving civic equity and overall quality of life. So let's face it, we already know that this is going to be some globalist bullshit, right? Essentially, they don't like that you're free to travel. That's what it comes down to. It makes you a lot harder to control. Okay, so that's just my take on it, but it holds up. So they want to redesign cities into this little all-inclusive digital cage where you don't need to leave the city to do anything. I get it, it sounds okay so far, but everything reachable by walk, bike, or public transportation, fair enough, okay? Until you start to factor in all of the other variables and wealth of data points that would provide, along with the systems that we've already spoken of. And while this part is purely speculative for now, it really isn't a far cry to imagine in the event of another scamdemic. They would allow for even easier and more impossible to avoid lockdowns through this stuff with 24-hour digital surveillance. And while they have already started moving forward with little pilot programs, there's one that they did in Paris, France, Cleveland, Ohio, Portland, and Washington, D.C. To be totally clear, it's impossible to tell if it's even going to be feasible in a lot of places. In a lot of places, I'm sure it won't be. But they want to force you into the places that it is. But it would at very least require massive changes in city layouts and infrastructure to do that. So let's just put a pin in that for the moment, but I'm wanting to put it in your mind. And let's discuss 3 other pieces of legislation that is currently being debated in the House and the Senate, and they were all called conspiracy theories like a few years ago. First up, digital IDs, which would combine all your biometric data, your health history, travel, vaccine status, banking, etc., all into one place, and it can just be scanned to access anything or everything that they require it for. Right now in the UK, where the program was prevented the first go-around because people got pissed off and took to the streets, rightfully, they're now in the process of making them required for employment. Several other countries like Singapore, India, Sweden, Belgium, Netherlands, Nigeria, there were some others, they're already using some form of digital ID. And there's been hacking incidents, people shut out of their money, out of their lives, basically. It's been not the cleanest rollout ever. Currently in the US, what we're dealing with is something called the Improving Digital Identity Act. And it's been introduced and it's moved through committee so far, but it's not yet a law. It's currently stuck in the Senate, but it's just waiting on a full vote. Next up is the long laughed off central bank digital currency, or CBDC, that I've been harping on for over 20 years now. Something that up until now only lacked the infrastructure for being adopted. But it's been a long sought after goal for some time now. And while legislation has been passed to, for now at least, I guess, it would put off the adoption of it until 2030, when, ironically enough, all of this and more is supposed to really come together under Agenda 2030. CBDCs remain a regular debate topic, with many proponents and a shrinking number of dissenting voices. Proponents argue that it could stabilize the money supply for things like bank runs, and would make money laundering and counterfeiting and untaxed private sales obsolete, meaning this would eliminate any sort of anonymity and be a fully programmable and trackable form of currency, all that would be tied to the individual, which could also be linked for use or distribution of funds to a digital wallet or as part of your digital ID. The fear of this type of system all along has been that it would also allow for every single purchase to be monitored and tracked, and for it to be deactivated for non-compliance reasons, or say you posted a dissenting social media post, anything else that they might deem to be a worthy offense in the future. Or with the big push for less meat consumption, with people like Bill Gates funding GMO ticks and the WEF having open discussions about it being ethically responsible to spread alpha-gal syndrome through the use of infected ticks to try and curb the world's meat consumption. Alpha-gal, if you're unaware, it isn't a feminist superhero, despite the catchy name. It's actually a potentially life-threatening food allergy, and it makes you allergic to red meat. I know that it's, at least most commonly, it might only be, to the best of my knowledge, carried by the Lone Star tick, which basically just like injects a tiny little sugar molecule into the host, and then that spreads via the bloodstream. Interestingly enough, spread of that exact tick has exploded recently, with talking heads, wait for it, you'll never guess, of course, blaming that on climate change, of course. Despite multiple videos and testimony of farmers, hikers, hunters, and others finding literal metal boxes full of ticks, and they've been busted open, like on their land, just laying around in the woods, like they've been dropped from an aircraft or something. I swear you can't make up the level of cartoonish villainy that we're seeing in the world right now. To bounce that back to the CBDCs, say they just impose purchase limits, and you get declined because you've exceeded your limit of meat for that month. All of that is possible, and it's increasingly realistic, more and more by the day. I know my audience is smart, so I don't feel like I need to put all of that together for you and kind of spell how everything is coming together, but it's going to build this in-game level control grid with inescapable surveillance and AI enforcement, and it's happening as we speak. And I don't say all this to bum you guys out or to make you worry constantly about it. I say it in hopes that you'll contact your local and state representatives, for one thing, and try to push back on all of this before it becomes too late. If you think your voice doesn't matter now, then just wait till all of this is fully in place. They know that they've lost control of the narrative, and people are getting fed up. Epstein woke up a whole lot of the quote-unquote normies who never would have believed in elite pedo networks otherwise, and now even they're pissed off, and they're asking questions. And I know that those in charge see that, and they realize at this point that it won't really be possible to put that toothpaste back in the tube, and it seems like they're getting very nervous about it. And that shows up by the progressively more and more outrageous laws that they pass. Oh, another law, before I forget about it. The automobile kill switch, where after 2027, AI facial recognition from cameras and audio all through your car would monitor you, and if you look too sleepy, or you look like you might be on some substance, or you're too angry, or whatever it is, whatever they deem it to be in the future as well, they can just force your car to pull you off to the side of the road and kill it. And you're stuck there. With no way to, at this point at least, repeal that decision. It's just made for you and you're stuck, which could lead to death. It could lead to all kinds of horrible situations. And that's passing. I mean, people like Massey and a few others have pushed back hard on it, but they're determined to shove that through. So unless we can wake up and set all this partisan politics bullcrap aside and actually come together in order to meaningfully resist what's coming, the future has a very high likelihood of being extremely dystopic. And it's primed and ready to happen very quickly if it does. And I hate to make this episode so doom and gloom. I know that these topics aren't really much fun to talk about or to hear about, but I also know I'm probably just preaching to the choir over here, but I feel like this is really important to understand. We can also talk about solutions, which is really what I would prefer to focus on. But above all, first we need unity. We've got the numbers, and for now at least, we've got the power to force the government back into line. But it can't just be a small part of the population trying to do it. All we really have working for us on our side at this point, let's face it, is the numbers, which is exactly why we are constantly being emotionally manipulated and divided at every turn. And people really have to stop taking the bait on this stuff. There will always be a portion of the population that will refuse to see or believe. And the older generations who still get all their information from the news and fall for every narrative, for example. We will never be able to change those people. But a majority of Gen X through Z, at least, are fed up or they're getting there. And they're ready to work for change with us. We need to reach across all of the contrived divisionary lines and actually work together. Form groups to educate and support one another. Start an entirely new political party if we have to. Whatever it takes to make our voices heard. Because the old way, let's face it, it hasn't been working, and it hasn't worked for a very long time. And I think most of us out there feel that, and we feel that we would be open to trying another way, whatever that is. Until we can make that a reality, though, we really just kind of have to fully exercise what levers of power we still can reach. Which means voting out anyone that's pushing these kind of agendas. Support anyone, regardless of party, if they're ready to stand up to the actual establishment and fight for us. We need way less fake anti-establishment people like Trump and way more Thomas Masseys and Ro Khanna types. I know voting feels pointless, and trust me, after Massey was primaried, despite the very impressive, most impressive I've ever seen nonpartisan grassroots push that he got, it made me feel that way again. For the moment, though, it's really the best that we can do, so we might as well try it. I'm going to become much more active in the Discord again, as well as over in the Patreon chat, and I'm going to be getting these sorts of conversations going, or trying to at least, in hopes that we can kind of start at least brainstorming solutions. So if you're really someone that's ready for change, then please join me and others over there and let's discuss solutions. Those are both free to join, by the way, so you've got nothing to lose. And, I hope to see you over there. I can only extend the invite, but I guess that's really all that I wanted to say tonight. I'll be taking a few weeks away as far as the main episodes go, just to get some things ready for the rest of the season, but there will still be content. I'll be dropping some interviews and I'll probably do a BTR or two, depending on what's going on. We've still got some really big episodes coming this season, though, and a lot of it's stuff that I've wanted to cover for a long time. I guess this is where I tell you to make sure you're subscribed so you know when those episodes drop. It does help us out, too. And I guess that's really about it. I appreciate you listening to my rant here, and I love you guys, so take care of yourselves out there. Take care of one another if you can, and I'll talk to you all again real soon on the next Clandestine Radio.